Once you've been selected to be a TED Talk speaker, the next question is how to write a TED Talk script like a pro. Because for sure you want to give a great speech. And I invited a special guest today, Kristina Pater, a writing coach and editor that helps people apply the same techniques used by Hollywood screenwriters to TED Talks and keynotes. Her clients include a wide range of heroic characters and companies, from luxury hotels, medical teams, researchers, authors, speakers, CEOs, and high performance in 34 countries and counting. And when you do something the first time, like something like a TED Talk, it's so serious and you nervous and you want to put everything there, to put your soul, to put all of your stories. So when you meet with a client the first time, or maybe how was that first time for you? What do you tell them when you meet? How do you advise them?
Well, typically I first find out, I have a lot of sayings that you'll that you'll realize. Some I've made up and say to myself, and others that are industry adages or industry expressions. But one thing that I say, and I have found to be true in my own work, is that it's important always to go with what you know. It's a very easy phrase. So like if you're facing a blank page or you're a blank notebook and you're trying to decide what to do or what to write about or how to start, I always start with go with what you know. And so typically in a TED Talk, that translates into meaning what pieces do you know? Like, why do you want to write a TED Talk? What is your, what do you think is your idea? Because usually people don't just show up and just be like, hey, I want to do a TED Talk and I have no idea what it's about. Usually they have some kind of idea. They have some kind of personal message, some kind of mission, a story, an anecdote, a key message, a key theme from their life that they want to share with the world. They want to articulate in a professional format and share with the world. So we start with wherever they're at, so it's usually a conversation. It's very conversational. And I think that that's something that maybe like going to a financial advisor or maybe even like going to a dentist, for people who are a little bit intimidated by it, might think it's intimidating or scary in some way, but it's really, I just follow a really, really organic process. And, it's kind of like, where are you at? What are you thinking about? What are you passionate about? And see where the conversation goes. Because usually the client has a reason that they're there and that they're investing their resources, whether it's time, energy, financial resources, into an endeavor like a TED Talk.
Yeah, but what if a person has a lot of stories?
If that is a great question, because sometimes I have had the occasion where a person has had, just enough stories to fill 5 entire TEDx events, all by themselves. And so, what we do, that is called the brain dump process, right? And so it's going through and really thinking through the different ideas, articulating what they are, really taking an idea inventory as well of what are they. Are there, common themes between, let's say there's 20 ideas, right? So we just look through them and first assess and take an inventory. Are these all truly ideas that would translate to a TED Talk? And TED Talks now fall somewhere between 5 minutes and 18 minutes typically. So if we actually do the math, if someone's sitting there with a calculator, we speak at about a rate of 120 to 150 words per minute. So depending on your time slot at a TED event, you can see, or TEDx event, you can see how many words, what your word count is, that you can reasonably speak in this time frame. So if you're doing the idea inventory, you've got 20 ideas, the first thing is to really assess, is this idea really fitting for an entire TED Talk? Or is this maybe a story that fits into, so maybe number 19 fits into idea number 5, which is really an idea that could be an entire talk. So we just really think through those themes. Is it truly an idea? Is it a bullet point? Is it an anecdote? Is it a supporting story? Is it something completely different? And kind of wade through that. So that's the first thing. And really then kind of do okay, we thought we had 20 ideas, but maybe it's really 6 ideas. And these other things fall in somewhere else. And then from there we can, I can do some coaching, some questioning about, what is the client most passionate about? Is there, just going through different scenarios. Is it important, why, going back to why you want to do the talk, does it relate to a bigger mission you have in your personal life or professional life? And where maybe is your voice most distinct? So a lot of questions, a lot of considerations. And one thing that's important with that, if you are a person starting out with so many ideas, is to allow yourself the time to metabolize and to think through, to reflect back on the questions that I or another coach may ask, and that you as the performer, the speaker, ultimately are going to get on stage and do. I do think that there is a very big fallacy that, doing a TED Talk is like going through this is like an over-exaggeration, but it's like going through a McDonald's drive-through. Like you just, show up, you just call me on the phone, or you call somebody on the phone, like, what should I talk about? Let's write down the talk and go. Like, people take months and many iterations to craft their message as well as their speech for a TED or a TEDx event.
Of course, that's important, because once it goes live, it will serve you for so many years. It will support your message, it will support your brand, it will support your business. Although you cannot sell anything in TED speech, TED or TEDx, nowhere in the stage, but you can share something from your business side or from your personal stories to get this idea to life. And then also following up with your 100 something words. I was always bad with words, but a little advice here. I just count the time when how long time does it take for me to speak one page. So for each page of written text, if I write a speech, it takes me about 2 minutes. And then you know how long it may take to develop the talk. And then, Kristina, well, many stories, people want to share their message, but they also want, as I mentioned, to serve them in the long term. So how to write a TED Talk, combining those stories, but getting people to that message which you can then use like in your business letter?
Well, I think that is the execution part. Well, I look at the writing as like a 3-lane process. So if you imagine yourself entering a highway ramp with 3 lanes, right? There's 3 lanes of writing, and there's story, which is the overall message. It's like, what are you saying? What is your, what's your jam out there? And then second is structure. And that is, how are you putting it together, and how are you telling it? How are you conveying the points? Is it a list? Is it like is it like the 5 things you need to know about something? Or is it a series of stories and anecdotes explaining the process? Or is it something else? And then the third part of writing is structure. So it's execution. So it's story, it's structure, and it's execution. So it's really important to start at those, to start in each of those lanes. And so just like when you're traveling on a freeway, you might go back and forth between 2 lanes, and that's okay. But if you are in 3 lanes, that usually means you're sideways, and that's when you're going to be in trouble and be putting yourself at risk. So that's why you really want to start with the message, and then, and think through how that goes back to your brand and to the things that you're asking about. And that's where it's important to understand that writing is a team sport. So if you're thinking that if you're going back to high school where you're just supposed to sit there and do your homework, or even university where you're just like all yourself, you've got to cram this thing out, that's not going to work in this environment. You must get outside feedback and ideas for yourself, and learn how to ask for feedback, learn how to receive feedback, so that you can incorporate it and make sure that you're on point to meet all of the goals that you want to have.
Well, you told this scary situation for people. Go out even before the TED Talk and share with everyone. What if they will not like it? What is actually the real problem when you write a TED Talk? It seems super simple, like story, then structure, and then execution. And then you share with everybody. Where people really get stuck.
Yeah, well, where they really get stuck, I think, or where I see them in my clients, is the mindset. It's the mindset of, I know the alphabet. So I know the alphabet. I had high school English, I had college English, I was a journalist, like all the same things as a writer I told myself before doing different types of writing. So there is, like, unless you've gotten private training or coaching in a very specific way for TED Talks or public speaking, your past writing experience is not a direct translation to what it is like to go on stage. There is a different way to do it, and there's a different way that a live audio audience listening to you hears your material. And so that's the biggest thing, is thinking that your whatever training and degrees you have automatically translate directly. They'll translate some, of course, but there's not a direct translation. And so, like in many places, it's that you don't know what you don't know. And so if you understand that there's going to be a little bit of a gap and there's going to be things to learn for best practices, you're in better shape.
And you mentioned that you start with the story and you put it as the core of the TED Talk, like story structure and execution. What I've heard, sometimes people recommend for the speech, pick maybe several short stories and just do, let's say, 5 minutes for one story, 5 minutes for another one, 5 for the third one, and they all align to each other, and then you make the conclusion. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, I think it's there's no one size fits all, is something I say all the time. There's no one size. There's no one formula for what makes anything successful anywhere, really, but especially for a TED Talk, because like what you just said, automatically, if there were 3 stories, I would structure them differently. I personally would have the first one longer, or maybe the second one longer, and I'd have the last one shorter, because by then the audience is getting a little bit fatigued. So, but I think there's a lot of different structures someone can use. And so if you're most comfortable with stories, then I definitely do that. I think going with where your comfort zone is and working with that is the most organic way for people to feel comfortable. Well, how many times have we seen people take a stage anywhere and be a little bit stiff? And so that automatically makes you, as the audience, like you just, feel a little bit less comfortable. And so if you can be relaxed and enjoying your discussion, your talk, your audience is going to resonate with you so much more. So I think that's super, super important. And so therefore, again, if you want to do a series of stories inside a talk, great, go for that. If you want to add in jokes and try to be funny, or if you want it all to be serious, or you want to vary it throughout so it's more dynamic, it's your masterpiece to create. And so if you're working with your trusted advisors, not everybody, you don't want to go out and give everybody your speech before you do it, but if you're working with a small team of trusted advisors, then you can articulate, okay, it's important that I share these 3 stories, and let me know where it feels long, or where maybe I need a joke, or where something doesn't make sense. That's the purpose of having more of that collaboration.
To kind of see the reaction of people on what you say, and to see where they get bored, where they laugh, and what you can add and what you can remove out of that to make it even stronger.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Well, in every speech, in every talk, there are two most important parts. It's the beginning and the end. Do you have any tips on how to start it and how to end it that the memory about the talk will last for a long time?
Sure, I do. I think, again, there are many ways to start a TED Talk. There's no one way or one formula that guarantees success. I think that's something direct, shorter, and on message, and really making sure that whatever that is understandable. So whether that is a one line that is sort of the thesis of your talk, that is a little bit disruptive or not. Maybe it's plain. Maybe it's a short anecdote. Maybe it's a story. Maybe it's a story that's a little bit longer. Maybe you start with a 2 or 3 minute story and then, break down the point. So I think the important part is, again, and I again think, I can't emphasize enough, it's important that you're excited with how it starts because your enthusiasm is going to carry it. So, if you heard me say something like, oh, start with a research stat, and you're like, not really excited about it, but somehow you have the idea in your head that starting, 96% of people are, blah, and you're bored with it, it's not going to carry like, the time I went to Ibiza, was this, so it's like, what do you feel is going to land? And you can test different things out, and different people can, how different people are dynamic, so they can make different things work. But the most important thing is that it's understandable, that the message is understandable. Because sometimes also we try to be crafty, or maybe we try to have elaborate language, or maybe we're not even trying, as your and my exchange the other day, where I was telling you some jargon and it wasn't understandable to you, because we speak different native languages. So that's another reason to test it out and make sure it's understandable. Because if people can follow you, they are interested in what you have to say, and they want to, first of all, be able to understand your message, your point, your story, your anecdote, whatever it is. And then I'll wait before I go to the end. Any follow-up questions on that?
It looks like you need to know your audience and think how your language, how your stories will align with their stories in how they speak. Because I remember the situation when I said the word and I had the meanings for those words, and you had another meaning, like the blockbuster, and just because we live in the different sides of the world, we had a different meaning for that. So keep in mind who are those people who you want to reach. And when your talk will get online, the audience will be different. Like you can send it directly to those people who you tried to reach, not those people who were live in the audience where you presented your talk. So keep in mind those people who you want to address that message.
Absolutely. And especially if you're like you and I, who speak to different international audiences often, there's nuances of words. So when speaking to an international audience, there's a whole nother consideration set there of using more, I call it plain language. What to me is plain language, but is more maybe common language, so that the nuances that I think I'm trying to make aren't there. And likewise, if someone else is saying something, it may land differently to someone else.
Yeah. And what about the end?
So the end, again, like there can be a lot of different ways to end it. So it could be a final story that wraps up all the points you've made. It could be a summary of your point. It could be like a conclusion type of thing where you hit back on everything that you've talked about to this point. I think they all work. So you can choose the best way to end your talk and also base it on what you want to do. Some people have had longer stories in the middle, so their end is then very short. And that's also fine. So they end it with a very sharp point, or a very sometimes a very subtle line that if you allow people to pause and take it in, it really makes you think. And so it's really clever. So again, it's a lot of options. Go with what feels right and test it out. There should be a few months of preparations. That means a few months of metabolization and seeing how it feels in your body when you're speaking that ending. And just knowing too that as you work on the speech on paper, you can edit, and, and make adjustments as you feel, as you feel how it's working and how people are reacting to it in your early small test audiences.
Are there any tips how you should not start and end the talk? One of the tips which I know and I still see on TEDx, that people start the talk with thanking everybody. Thank you, my mom. Thank you, organizer. Thank you, this and this. And you spend 1 minute just thanking everyone. This is your time. What else they should not do?
Sure. Actually, yeah, that's a great point. It is your time, and it's not something you want to do there. A few things. Long anecdotes, really, really long anecdotes and winding anecdotes. Anything that's unrehearsed, I would say, be careful of that, because it can just not translate well for different reasons. It can end up being too short and you miss key information, or it can end up being rambling and you're using your time. I would also say too much numbers-based research. Using too many numbers, audiences, when we're hearing numbers versus reading them, it's very difficult to follow. So if you're throwing like 2 or 3 or more numbers in a couple minute segment or even throughout your speech, it will just lose it. Versus if you say 95% of people think you shouldn't use numbers and that's the only number you use, then it's easier for people to remember that. And so it's okay to repeat the same number if you want to articulate it in a different way, but to have many kinds of different numbers tends to lose people in a speech. Another mistake is trying to cram too much content in too short of a time frame. And so that's like too much story for the 15-minute talk you have. You might, and sometimes you don't know if you're a creative professional, an entrepreneur, if you're anyone and you're working on your first talk or your first written piece or spoken piece like this, it might be a little bit hard to judge. Hey, is this a 15-minute story, or can this be a 5-minute story? That's where people who are newer writers tend to not have a feel for how many plot twists or obstacles or goals can someone have in a single story and be understandable by an outside audience. And so that's a good place to get input, because a lot of times people, a lot of us, we're built, especially entrepreneurs, right? We're built to provide value. So we, in our mind, in our attempt, in our, premise of providing value, we think, oh yeah, I'm going to tell you this and this. I'm going to tell you 100 tips on this, 30-minute thing. But that's not memorable if we're talking so fast and so much information. So we've got to remember to, like a fine wine, open it up, let it breathe. And that's where, if you're not sure about that, that's where a close group of your trusted advisors or a coach or someone you trust and are working with can help you answer that question when you're doing your rehearsals about that particular topic. And then I think the other key lesson that is so important for people to understand, and is also a very gentle one, is that at the end of the day, even though the TED Talk is totally about you because you're doing it and you're putting your heart and soul into it, it's actually not about you. It's about the audience. It's about the people that you're there to serve. And it's about the people that need to hear the message that you have to share. And that then can make it feel and remind you that it's very sacred, and can help writers, help speakers let go of the idea that perfectionism and doubt and fear and some of these other things. Because when you are focusing on your audience, or you're focusing on that person, that one person for whom this message might really make a difference, might change their life, might save their life, might make a profound difference in their life, that's who I encourage people to think about when they're working on this and when they're doing the work in preparation.
That's interesting that you mentioned that focus on one person and maybe even write a talk for that one person, particular one, that you know that your message will touch him or her. So if there will be people in the audience or people who you will share your message with, your TED Talk later, they will listen to it or watch it and they will get your message, your story that you want actually expand for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's also interesting part was where you mentioned, Kristina, 15 minutes. Just for our listeners, 15 minutes is the better time to plan your talk. Even if the officially you can do 18 minutes. When you get on stage, it can be a little bit longer. Even if you practice 15 minutes, just give yourself a little bit of space, extra time. And it's better to make a talk shorter than over the time which you were given on the stage.
Yes, organizers will absolutely appreciate that. And for the most part now, I'm hearing TEDx talks ranging from 5 minutes up to 18. So yeah, you really want to, if you have one of those shorter slots, like 5 minutes or 8 minutes, those can be tough to get. That's another, place where a lot of times there's too many ideas for that amount of time. So yeah, really important to think about it and rehearse to that time so you keep the show as the organizers, as you've committed to the organizers with your commitments.
Yeah, but even more, if your talk will be more than 18 minutes, I saw the stories when it didn't go through the system, so the talk wasn't published because it was too long. Yeah, so keep that in mind. And then you also mentioned several times, like when you write or outline. So what should people do? To write the whole talk, to write the main parts, or they should outline everything and just go on stage and speak whatever they want, if they hit 18 minutes or they will be longer or shorter?
So that's, again, like it's not a one size fits all answer. And the reason that I keep saying that is because if somebody starts and says, oh, I have to write this long outline, or oh, I have to write this full speech, and they feel blocked by it, they're not going to feel good about their project, their process and what they're doing. And I find with all the writers I work with, one of the key things I find that I say over and over is it's so important for you to feel good in the process. So whatever that is, like, and I'm always working with people like, how does this sound? And then we try it. And so it might be like, oh, let's put an outline into an Excel spreadsheet or something. When we start somewhere and then we kind of take a test of how does that feel? It's like, oh, that seems like a really good idea at first. So we start it and maybe for one reason or another, it's not working. So we say, okay, let's shift gears. How about if we try to do an outline in just 2 pages? Does that feel better now? And so you just kind of have to work with what seems logical to you and where do you feel called to go? Is it to write the whole speech? Is it to write the outline? And that goes back to that 3 lanes of traffic that I mentioned, right? And so you really want to, before you start writing the whole speech, if you're someone who's going to write the whole speech versus bullet points, do you have an idea of the structure? Because if you don't, you could be wasting time and wasting energy and then kind of burn out on the project. So it's good to think through what step you choose. And it's just to underscore that you may have a different step for each different project. If you do 5 TEDx talks, you might start each of them differently. Or maybe you find that you work exactly the same way, but projects can vary. And so it's good to try to just really be in touch with your instinct about what would be most serve you as a next step every step of the way in the process. And just knowing, giving yourself the freedom of there's not an exact process, and your fifth grade teacher is not going to come back and point fingers or write in red pen on your paper that you did something wrong. It's up to you to find the way that you feel good, the way that you feel like you're making progress, and the way that it's actually coming together for you.
Sounds good. So now they should just either write it or outline and go and practice. But then how do they change everything in between? Like if you write the whole talk, that's understandable. You can just change the words there or change the phrases. But when they just outline and go there, don't you forget what you talk about the first time? I mean, you remember the concept, but do you have any suggestions how they can correct what they planned before?
I'm a fan of writing out the entire speech, because I think that real estate, if you will, is so precious. And that is how that's why my clients come to me, because if it's not on the page, I can't edit it. So the expression in our industry is you cannot edit a blank page. So if somebody wants to share a TED Talk with me, they can, but if it's not written down, we don't really have a way to edit. Like hopefully if someone is speaking from bullet points, we could say like, hey, you kind of seem to, get lower energy from this, or you said this word in this story and that's a flag. I would take that word out. So then you're relying more on memory. And because I come from more of the written word background, I do more of the full writing out and then full rehearsals with those scripts, and then back it up into bullet points as prompts for people so that you can really nuance the language or adjust stories, or really look at, hey, is this story, the way I'm telling it, making the point of the speech? Because that can happen where it's a thing that happens too. If someone's telling like a personal story, like let's say I ask you tell me a story about your vacation and how that relates to this TED Talk. All of a sudden you're telling the story and you remember this great time at the beach and your friend, and oh my God, and then they had, cherry juice for sale because it was in season, and you just sort of get off on a tangent that doesn't relate back to the point again. So that's another reason to really like hammer that out and get that on paper so that you are choosing consciously which details relate to the point you're trying to make.
Such a great point. Thank you, Kristina. And if you would give a big piece of advice, what would you tell to people? What would you tell to those who want to write a TED Talk?
I would say that writing is a team sport. It's a team sport. And even Billy Idol wasn't dancing by himself in Dancing with Himself. You can literally Google that right now. You can Google the video. He is not. And so think of your team. Think of at least 2 or 3 trusted friends or advisors that you can be bouncing your ideas off of, that can be a sounding board for you so that your material is well developed.
I've never heard about it, that writing is a team sport. You need a team to write and speak. That's a very interesting and powerful idea, because then you can really share your message and make sure that when you get on stage, you will be ready and you will deliver as 100% of yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And if we look at other similar industries, like if you look at the publishing industry, if you're publishing a book with a top 4 publisher, you would have at least 4 editors, plus yourself as the writer. And so I'm in the process of a project now, and I think I've had 6. I will have 6 by the time the project is done, and that includes that doesn't include other extra people. So there would be I don't know, maybe up to 30 people who've read the project before it's gone out, by some by my decision, but also some by the way that the project is set up. And so sometimes people really think that that's odd to ask for help with a TED Talk, or they think I should be able to do this. They have like a misconception, like, oh, I should just be able to do this by myself. But that, again, is going back to like grade school and high school thinking and maybe college thinking. And so we want to, elevate you. Also, there will be probably writing coaches and coaches that work with you as part of the TEDx team.
Fantastic. And tell us more about your new book and all those details and how people can find more about you, how they can contact with you.
Sure. Thank you. My new project is called The Hollywood Approach, and in it, I walk people through the same exact steps that I used to create a hero and heroine on screen for a movie, and I help people apply those techniques to their real life so they can be living their wildest dream. And people can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and my website, all my full name, Kristina Pater. It's Kristinapaider.com, or LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can sign up to receive, be on my list to receive news about my book if you'd like. It's coming out next February.
That's so exciting. My dear listeners, I will put the links into the show notes so you can go check them out and check Kristina's work. And the book is going to be very interesting. You definitely should check it out next year. Kristina, you're amazing. Thank you so much for being such a great guest and for your really important and insightful tips. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marina. It's always a pleasure to be here.
I hope you got more clarity and many tactics on how to write a TED Talk speech. Now, watch this video to get more tips that will help you to prepare and give a great speech. And also, subscribe to the channel and click a bell to get notifications about new videos.